Welcome back everyone to Blindfold Chess Training Day 9, and today what we're going to be doing is continuing off from yesterday where we looked at two mid-length chess games, and today we're also going to be looking at two mid-length chess games, but this one we're going to dive a little bit further into the tactics and also make sure we understand where all the pieces are at all times. And yeah, understanding how the pieces, how we're actually, like why we're playing the moves we do, and also trying to guess the moves that we play as well. So we're really trying to visualize in our heads what's going on rather than just following along with the game. So we're going to start with the first game, and this game is a 17 move game, so it's a pretty quick one from White's perspective, and the next one I think is a 33 move game from Black's perspective, so totaling about 50 moves. Okay, this one is David Howe with the white pieces, and we're going to start. Okay, so we start with the move e4. So if you don't already know, what we do is we visualize what happens once you play the move e4. Your bishop's diagonal opens up and your queen's diagonal opens up. Now, I haven't seen this game, so some tactics I might miss or some ideas I might miss, but we'll look through it after the game. So e4, the opponent responds with e5. So far, so good. Very standard. Very standard. Just the basic e4, e5. The opponent's bishop also opens up. The opponent's queen also opens up. We play the move knight f3. The opponent responds with knight c6. Okay, very standard. We've developed one piece. The opponent has also developed one piece. Now we've developed two piece. One piece and two. Okay, if you know one piece, you know what I mean. Wait, I don't know what I'm saying. Ignore me. Bishop to c4 is the move we play next. So this is the Italian game. Now our bishop has moved from the f1 square to the c4 square. And now if we have a look at the squares our bishop controls, it controls all the squares d5, e6, f7. It also controls all the squares it came from, d3, e2, f1. It controls the b3 square, also controls b5, a6. Now those have been played. We've developed two pieces. We're ready to castle. The opponent plays knight f6. Knight f6, a very logical move, bringing the knight out. Now in some openings we can go for knight g5, going for the fried liver attack, but let's see what they choose. So David Howe chooses the move d3. He wants to play very safe, defending the pawn on e4. That's the point of the move. And now we take stock of the position, just to make sure we understand what's going on. The opponent has developed two knights, or I guess I'll have you pause the video. Tell me all the pieces that have come out, and so let me know where each piece is on each square, as in what piece is on what square right now. All of them. Name all of them. And also tell me which diagonals are open, and also tell me what are the squares both queens can go to. So your queen and their queen. So it's going to take a while, might take 2-3 minutes. Pause the video, name everything, try and be sure of it, and I'll go through it now. So as for right now with the move d3 played, the pawn structure for white goes a2, b2, c2, d3, e4, f2, g2, h2. The king is on e1, the rook is on h1, the queen is on d1. There's still a bishop on c1, there's a knight on b1, there's a rook on a1. There's a knight on f3, there's a bishop on c4, and there's a pawn on... Oh yeah, I went through the pawns. That's white army. Black army, there's a pawn on e5, there's a knight on f6, there's a knight on c6. There's a king on e8, there's a rook on a8. There's still a bishop on f8. There's a queen on d8. There's a bishop on c8. There's a... I was going to say knight on b8. No, the knight is on c6. The rook is on a8. And the pawns are still... a7, b7, c7, d7, f7, g7, h7, and e5, if I didn't already say e5. So those are the pieces. So I'm pretty sure I know those position. Now the diagonals that have opened, without opening my eyes, diagonals that are open, of course the bishop's diagonal that we've developed on c4. As for the bishop on c1, that is now open because we played the move d3. So it can go to d2, e3, f4, g5, h6. And the opponent's bishop on f8 is able to move, but the opponent's bishop on c8 is not able to move. And as for the queen squares, I can see that our queen the white queen can go to d2. It can also go to e2. The opponent's queen can only go to e7. So that's what I see so far. That's the image I have of the position. Now, the opponent plays bishop c5. So they develop their bishop to c5. Now, both armies have got how many pieces out? We have got 2 pieces out, the knight and the bishop, and they have got 3 pieces out. So actually, they are slightly ahead in development in this case. So let's see what we do now. We play the move c3. Now, if you don't already know, c3 is a pretty common move in the Italian. The idea is normally to play b4, a4, and push for b5 or a5. And c3 can also support d4 in some cases. And also c3 gives the option of playing bishop e3, bishop c2, bringing the bishop back. So c3 makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we play the move c3, keep that in mind. Now the knight can't go to c3. Okay, the opponent responds with a6. a6 makes a lot of sense. Normally, in response to something like a4 or b4, you want that a6 move included so you can put your bishop on a7. So they play the move a6. Okay, we play the move bishop to b3. Bishop to b3 is a logical move. It gets out of any ideas of like knight a5. Because now, since they've included a6, this is a quick chess trick for you all. When they've included a6, and if you can visualize this position, you don't have the move bishop b5 check. Normally when they play knight a5, you want to respond with bishop a5 check and b4, which would fork the pieces. But now, since they've included a6, you can't play bishop b5 check, meaning knight a5 would threaten to take your bishop. That would be pretty bad for you. You wouldn't want that. So it makes sense that David played bishop b3. Okay, after a6, bishop b3, they play bishop a7, also a very logical move, bringing the bishop back into safety, getting out of any d4 ideas. So currently, the bishop is on a7, the knight is on f6, the knight is on c6, the pawns are on e5 only for the opponent, e5 and a6, and the rest are still on their starting squares. And for us, we have c3, d3, e4, and the rest of the pawns are on the starting squares. The bishop is on b3, and we only still have that knight developed. So yeah, looking to develop more pieces, but we still don't develop a piece. We play the move h3. Now h3, I'm actually not sure if h3 is the best move in this position. It makes a little bit of sense. Maybe you're stopping knight g4. So if you can visualize a bit, h3 kind of stops knight g4, but I don't know if knight g4 was really a threat. Like maybe I would have played a move like castle. Or what do I know? Yeah, h3, it's not terrible, but I wouldn't say it's a great move. It's not, okay, it's not terrible. The opponent plays d6, and we play the move knight b to d2. So they have opened the diagonal for their bishop, the bishop on c8, their only last undeveloped piece. We play the move knight b to d2. Very simple, but what we have done is blocked our bishop on c1. That's something we have to keep in mind. And just make sure you understand the pawn structures of each side every time. I'm sorry if you already know this, I just have to make sure everyone is keeping track. So we have the pawns on a2, b2, c3, d3, e4, f2, g2, h3. And the black pawns are on a6, b7, c7, d6, e5, f7, g7, h7. Now, what was I up to? d6, knight b d2. Okay, the opponent castles. So they castle the king. Makes a lot of sense. They do castle the king. So let's think about what we would play in this position. What would I play? So I made sure not to actually look at the move that was played in the game. So in a position like this, our bishop is on a pretty good square. We could maybe eventually bring it back to c2, but I don't think that's the number one priority. If I was playing, there's a typical maneuver of going rook e1, knight f1, knight g3, knight h4, knight f5, something like that is something I would definitely be on my radar. Yeah, I think that's just a very typical plan. I think that is what's going to happen. Let's see. Knight bd2. Ah, very interesting. Okay, so I was assuming that we were going to castle and play rook e1, but actually what happens in the game is he plays knight f1 immediately. So we still have not castled the king. But David Howe chooses an interesting approach of not castling the king, but playing knight f1, and I'm assuming the idea is knight g3. Playing knight h4, knight f5. It's a very unique idea. I haven't actually seen it played much like this. And the point is we haven't castled yet, so maybe we can even play something like g4 and just launch the pawns. Especially since the enemy's bishop is, I guess, not really in the game. And their bishop on c8 is pretty misplaced. It doesn't have a really good square. It can't go to g4. Can't go to f5, obviously, because the pawn is defending. On e6, it could go to e6, but I guess we could play bishop. I guess if the bishop goes to e6, we could play knight g5 at some point. Oh, if the bishop goes to e6, we play knight g5 at some point, maybe. Okay, he plays knight f1. And I want you to pause the video in your head and also think about potential plans in this position. Okay, the opponent plays d5. And d5 strikes me as a pretty strange move. And the reason it strikes me as a pretty strange move, well, it has its ideas. Like d5, it makes sense. We haven't castled, so the opponent is trying to break open the position. What the opponent is trying to say is, you haven't castled the king, so let me play d5, break open the position, and I'm going to exploit your uncastled king. The issue with d5, from what I see, is, from what I don't, I mean, I guess I'm not seeing, but yeah, from what I see is, why do I say this stuff? I lose my train of thought. The issue with d5 is you already played d6, so playing d5 kind of wastes the tempo, but I think black could kind of afford it in this case. But seeing as they're losing 7 more moves, I don't think it was a great move, but let's see what happens. Okay, after d5, David plays the move queen to e2. So the knight is still on f1 and f3, the queen is on e2. And here I would like you to pause the video, take stock of the position. So if you see a knight on f1, a knight on f3, a queen on e2, a bishop on b3, a bishop on c1, a rook on a8, pawns a2, b2, c3, d3, e4, f2, g2, h3. You've got it right, and a rook on h8, if I didn't already say. Now the opponent has a castled king, so that entire, what I see is an entire chunk of pieces. So the rook on g8, rook on f8, pawns f7, g7, h7. The knight is still on f6, the pawn's still on e5, d5, e5, d5, c7, b7, a6, bishop on a7, rook on a8, bishop on c8, queen on d8, because it hasn't moved. And I'm trying to see if I forget any pieces. Yes, I forgot the knight on c6. Yes, knight on c6. So those are both the armies. So in a position like this, so he plays the queen to e2, which makes a lot of sense. I guess queen e2, it's a kind of developing move, and it's saying, I don't know exactly what I want to do with my bishop on c1. Maybe I want to put it on g5, maybe I want to put the knight on g5 eventually if the bishop comes to e6. It's more of a waiting move, and it's just saying, okay, the queen's on e2, it's on a pretty good square. I'm sometimes threatening, if I castle the king eventually, I'm threatening to take and take on that pawn on e5. So queen e2 makes some sense. Now let's see what we play. So the opponent plays d takes e4. D takes e4. Doesn't strike me as a very good move. Simply for the fact that we can just take back. And also queen e2, just so I mentioned this again, it was also defending the pawn on e4. That pawn was being attacked twice. So we had to defend that pawn. D takes e4 doesn't strike me as a great move. We just take back. And I don't know what you've really achieved as black, but okay. So we play d takes e4. The opponent plays queen e7. Queen e7 again is a bit of a doesn't make much sense move. So let's see what queen e7 does. It puts the queen on a diagonal. So right now I want you to tell me all the squares the queen controls. And yeah, so every single square the queen hits on e7. Now from what I can see, it hits e6 and the e5 pawn it controls. It's still on the diagonal of, so the queen goes to e7, so it's still on that diagonal where it hits the knight on f6, so it doesn't see through there, but if it did, it would be f6, g5, h4. Also now the queen on e7 is on that bishop's regular diagonal, so it controls d6, c5, d6, c5, b4, a3. Yes, that's right. And our pawns now, just keeping a mental note, they're on a2, b2, c3, e4, and that d file is open. We have pawns f2, g2, h3. Can the queen on e7 give us a check? I don't think so. b4 is covered because we've played c3. So I'm not sure about this move the opponent has played. Like if I was us, and queen e7 as well, it puts the queen on a pretty vulnerable square because we want the knight to go to f5 anyway. So I don't really understand this move by the opponent. Because I want to play knight g3, knight h4, knight f5, and trying to checkmate the king. But let's see what happens. So we play knight g3. A lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. The opponent plays h6. Dubious move. Don't want to push pawns in front of your king, especially as you haven't finished development. The knight is still... Okay, the knight is on c6. It's finished development, but it can't go anywhere. d4 is covered. b4 is covered. So what's the knight really doing? h6 is a hook. Potentially I can sacrifice my bishop on c1 on h6. And I don't think h6 is a very good move at all, if I'm being honest. So knight h4 is played. Makes sense. The opponent plays king h7. Again, kind of moving pieces around the king. Not looking very good for black. So after knight h4, king h7, he plays the move knight h to f5. Now this move does what? So I want you to answer this question. Pause the video. Take stock of the position. Really think about it. Yeah, so this move hits the queen. So the queen is on e7. It's being attacked now by the knight on f5. Now they can take it. So from what I can see in my head, they can take it with the bishop, but it will be replaced by a knight. And we might have some tactics related to knight takes g7 or knight takes h6 or something along those lines. Maybe queen f3, queen g3, because we can't play queen g4 because knight takes g4. The knight on f6 would take us. Yeah, I don't like how the opponents play. Okay, they play the move queen e8. So again, kind of making moves that don't do much, very passive play. And now I think a kingside attack will be devastating. I'm already considering sacrifices in my head of knight takes g7. I'm not sure if it works at the moment. I'm trying to calculate it actually. So if knight takes g7, king takes g7. Yeah, I don't think it works because knight takes g7, king takes g7. You don't have knight f5, bishop takes. If you play bishop takes h6 check, king takes h6. Maybe there you have queen e3, but just king g7. I don't think there's enough. So how can we add more pressure? How can we add more source to this attack. How about immediately queen e3? Threatened knight takes. h6, potentially? And there's no knight g4 to hit the queen on e3. But what there is, there's a bishop on a7. So this is a mistake you can make in blindfold chess. And I think I've just made it. Queen e3 would be a massive blunder on account of bishop takes queen. So this is why you have to be very tentative, also me. Because if we remember, so this is where I made a mental mistake. So I'm going to keep track of all the pieces again. Which happens. It happens to everyone. So if it's happening to you, don't be discouraged. It's like there's so many pieces on the board. They do so many things. So you have to make sure you know all of them. So in this position, I would take stock of the position. What are all the pieces on the board? Okay, let me go through it again. We have a pawn on h3, a pawn on g2, a pawn on f2, a pawn on e4, a pawn on c3, a pawn on b2, a pawn on a2. Good. We have a rook on a1. We have a bishop on b3. We have a queen on e2. We have a knight on f5. We have a knight on we have a knight on g3. So knight g3, knight f5. We have a bishop on c1, a bishop on b3. Aha, we have a bishop on b3. That could be very nice for our attack. I just realized. Our king is still on e1, and our rook is still on h1. Queen on e2. Okay. Opponent's army. Their pawn structure is a7, b7, c7, e5, f7, g7, h6. Their king is on h7. The queen is on e8. Their knight is on f6. They have another knight on c6. They have a bishop on a7, which does attack the e3 square, so I have to be careful. They have a knight on c6, if I said that. They have a bishop on c8. Still hasn't moved. They have a rook on f8. They have a king on h7. I already said that. And a rook on a8. I think I've said all the pieces. So far we still all have all our pieces on the board except for one pawn. Yep. Okay, so queen e3 is off the cards. What else could we play in this position? g4, g5? Trying to really attack them. But I feel like a sacrifice works. I do feel like a sacrifice works. Like knight takes g7, king takes g7 doesn't work. Oh! Knight takes h6. Pawn takes h6. Queen d2. But then maybe knight g8. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, let's see what they play. Yeah, no sacrifice yet. They play the move queen f3. Makes sense. Queen f3, queen g3 was an idea that we had. Makes sense. Just getting the queen into a better square. Now the opponent plays knight to g8. So knight g8 is a bit of a preemptive move. It's a move I was calculating just before. And the point is, it's overprotecting the h6 square. But it doesn't protect the g7 square, so I'm a bit curious if some knight g7 moves work here. So I want you to calculate out if you can see any tactics in this position. Ooh, the knight can come to h5 as well. So potentially this could be very good. Because now they've moved the knight back from f6 to g8. So now h5 is not protected at all. I think that was a terrible move, by the way. I think it was a terrible move. Because now queen g4 is on the cards. Now queen h5. Queen h5 doesn't make much sense because g3. Yeah, doesn't make that much sense. Maybe queen h4 there. No, but queen h4... They take the knight. Yeah, it's not great. So now after knight g8, they overprotect h6, but they underprotect the g7 pawn. So do we have a sacrifice such as knight takes g7, king takes g7, knight h5 check? If king h8 there, there's no checkmate because queen f6 is covered because by the knight on g8. Interesting. Okay, let's see. Oh, they do play knight g7 and they do play knight h5. I swear I didn't see this before. I know it looks suspicious. I actually would maybe not have gone for this in this game, but it did look very tempting. I would have to calculate a bit deeper. Actually, that's how the game ended. Knight takes g7, king takes g7, and knight h5 check. Now, looking at this from a blindfold perspective, I'm just thinking king h8, and it's not that bad. But I'm probably missing something. Because, Oh, wait a second. Is it like bishop takes h6? Yes, I think so. Bishop takes h6 because if knight takes h6, you have queen f6 check. If the king comes to h7, you have queen g7 mate. Oh, if queen goes anywhere, you have mate. If the rook goes to... Oh, the rook can't come to e8. So if the rook goes to g8... If the rook goes to g8, then what? Oh, it's like knight f6 a fork? Between the rook and the queen, because the queen is on e8, the rook is on g8. And if knight takes f6... Oh, wait, what am I saying? The rook can't come on g8. The knight is there. Oh, that just looks like a devastating attack. Yeah, I can see why I resigned now. Okay, let's go through the game. A pretty good one, and I hope you at home did well trying to really understand this. So we're going to go through the game now. And I can finally see. This is so nice. Okay, Italian opening, nothing special. Bishop c5, c3, a6, bishop b3, bishop a7, h3. This h3 move, I guess it's normal. Yeah, normally I castle play knight bd2 here because I play this opening myself. But h3 is a pretty cool idea because it kind of delays. It delays your plans, and he could go for this idea in the game, this preemptive, without castling, playing this knight d2, knight f1, knight g3. h3. Opponent plays d6. This I thought was weird, but it is the top move. Oh, no. d6 was not weird. d5 was weird later on. Knight bd2. Castles. Now, knight f1 is very normal here. d5 is very normal. So this is still theory. So d5 is the top move. So it makes sense. You're opening up the position. Queen e2 is theory as well. Now, bishop e6 was a move I was considering. Taking the pawn, I didn't like as much. It is a move that's theoretical. Take. And queen e7. So far, so good. This was all theoretical, what they were playing. As you can see, there's many games in this line. Now, knight g3. Knight g3, the main move is bishop e6. And this is what I was thinking of, maybe to contest this bishop. But they played something weird here. Oh, they played h6. Here I thought it was a dodge, like a very strange choice. And I was right, yeah. So this was a strange choice because it allows us to go for the attack, and this pawn becomes a hook. So he forgot his theory here, and yeah, bishop e6 would have been much better. And after bishop e6, maybe just bishop c2. Yeah, and the game goes on. Rook d8, maybe castles, and the game goes on from here. But this is a mistake. Knight h4, best move. King h7 is another dubious move. So he was just moving his king and pawns around, not really developing his army. So this is not going to be good. Any knight to f5 is good. He chose the h knight. I think so far so good. I saw everything from here. And remember, the queen e3 trick is coming here. Where I was saying queen e3 for so long. Yeah, I think here I was like, there's no knockout blow. Like, there's no knockout blow. I was like, queen e3, but no, this hangs the queen. So be careful when you're trying to blindfold visualize, because you forget some pieces. Queen f3 makes sense. And yeah, here it was pretty bad for them. Yeah, so after knight g8, it's pretty much lights out. This is what I was calculating, this variation. I don't see it till the end, but I also did forget about this bishop kind of in the attack when I was thinking about it. So after king takes, I was thinking knight h5, and then I was thinking, so take knight h5, king h8, and from here I was trying to wonder what to do. Queen g3 is simple. Queen g3 and mate is unstoppable. Yeah, that's a much simpler way to finish it. I was thinking bishop h6 also works. Point is you're attacking the rook. This is also a threat. Bishop g7, and let's say you play a random move. I assume I just take, okay, I can just go, yeah, knight f6. If you take, there's mate here. And this is just crushing. So yeah, a very nice game by David Howe. And yeah, I think this one we did pretty well. Now, the next game will be harder. Much harder. So take a break, take a sip of water, if you haven't already. Water. Who doesn't love water? Okay, let's go to this game. So these are two, one is around 2500, the other one is around 2400. And this is black winning this game. So similarly, you can still visualize from black's perspective or white's perspective. I like to do it from white's perspective and still see all the plans from both sides. But you can flip the board as easily in your mind if you need to. And the way to do that, practice the coordinates from black's perspective. The thing we did in episode 1, practice that from black's perspective. Okay. Now, this is a 33 move game. We'll move slightly faster because I don't have all day, and neither do you. So, yeah. But we will still try and really visualize all the key things. Hopefully some piece trades happen, so it makes it a bit easier. But yeah, let's get into this. So we are playing the Sicilian. So if you don't play the Sicilian, it will be slightly harder, but still very useful to do because you still need to get all your senses in tune. So also another thing I'll mention about blindfold chess, it gets harder when the positions are not as symmetrical. So in the last game, I would say it's slightly easier because positions are symmetrical. There's not much chaos in the game, so everything is easy to remember. When it's a Sicilian and this is sacrificed and that is sacrificed, it gets much harder, but it's something we will learn. Okay, the game starts with e4. Okay, we respond with c5. So black responds with c5. Okay. This game, I'm actually switching the perspective. I'm looking from black's perspective in my mind. You can do, so in my mind, it looks something like this. You should be able to do both. I like normally white's perspective because it just makes it easier, especially if you're playing multiple games at the same time blindfolded. But it's good to switch it up. So in my mind, it looks like this. Like this. So c5, like if I play e5, it's here. You know, it's just opposite. We'll go for this one for today. Switch it up a bit. e4, we play c5. The opponent, and I haven't seen this game, by the way. That's why I close my eyes and look at the moves, because I haven't seen it. And I'm trying not to know the move so I can work it out in my own head as well. e4, c5. The opponent plays knight f3. We play the move d6. Okay, d6 is a standard move. Going into a standard knight off, I believe. d4, we play c takes d4. The opponent plays knight takes d4. And we play the move knight f6. Now, if you don't already know this opening, it's a pretty standard position. The point is, this is just a standard Sicilian defense where now black has developed their knight, attacking the pawn in the center. Now white normally responds with knight c3, and normally black chooses their choice of Sicilian. If they want to play something more classical, they go for well, there's a few choices. They can go for the knight off with a6. They can also play the variation with knight c6. They can also play the variation with e6. So they can choose a few options here. So here we play knight c3. Oh, and funnily enough, the variation I didn't mention is g6. So after knight c3, we play g6. And this is called the dragon. So this is the dragon variation. Typically not played at the highest levels because white can pretty much get an advantage in every line. But I guess this is not the highest level. And black thought, okay, I can outplay my underrated opponent and catch him off guard in theory. So g6 is played. The opponent plays bishop e3. Bishop e3, a very logical move. Now, the opponent has how many pieces developed? I want you to tell me, and which ones, and where are they? Good if you said knight f3. Oh, no. Not good if you said knight f3. Wait a second. Yeah, good if you said knight f3. Wait, is it good if you said knight f3? I need to think about the game. e4, c5, knight f3, knight f3, d6, d4, take. Yes, very bad if you said knight f3. So the knight is on d4, the knight is on c3, and the bishop is on e3, and the pawn is on e4. Now for us, we have a pawn on d6, a pawn on g6. Everything else is on its base coordinate. And we have a bishop on... Oh wait, we don't have the bishop on g7. We just played g6, right? Yeah. Now we have the bishop on g7. And we also have the knight on f6, yeah. So we've got 2 developed, they've got 3 developed. The opponent plays f3. f3, super logical, stopping any knight g4 ideas. Also bolstering the center of e4. Now, we play the move a6. a6 is a pretty logical move. This is kind of a mix of the dragon and the knight off, where you play a6. Here, sometimes you want to play b6, bishop b7, or you want to play b5, bishop b7, depending on where the opponent plays their light squared bishop. And you often want to develop the knight on d7 in these lines. The knight on b8 to d7. Okay. Opponent plays queen d2, super logical. Trying to play bishop h3. Oh, bishop h6, sorry. Bishop h6. But okay. We play knight bd by what did I just say? Byte? Knight bd7. So the knight is coming into the game. Now we have 3 pieces developed. And they have 4. So they have the knight. They have everything developed but the bishop on f1. Okay. Next moves. Knight bd7. Now the opponent plays g4. Wow. So now the game is getting a bit hectic, a bit chaotic, if you will. And g4 is a pretty logical move. Sometimes they play g4 before castling, sometimes they play g4 after castling. Here I think g4 before castling, it makes some sense, for sure. And yeah, so g4 is a logical move. You want to attack, you want to play h4, h5, and just rip open the king. Okay, g4 is good. We play the move b5. Makes a lot of sense. We're also going for the attack on our side of the board. We actually haven't committed to castling yet, which is pretty makes a lot of sense. You don't want to just castle into the attack, really. right now your opponent is launching an attack on the king side. You don't want to put your king where the attack is. Right now, it's okay. We haven't castled, it's fine. b5 makes a lot of sense. Next move. g5, okay. g5, the opponent has a threat. Now the threat is to attack our knight. Now where can our knight move? Can't go to d7. Our knight is already on d7. Can the knight go to d5? It can't go to d5, there's a pawn on e4. Can it take on e4? No, that pawn is defended by the pawn on f3. Also the knight on c3. Now can't go to g4, similar reasons, pawn on f3. And can it go to h5? In these positions, sometimes you want your knight on h5 just to prevent further advances on the king side with h5, h4. And also f4 in some cases. Your knight could also go to e8, I believe, because that's not occupied. And from e8, where can you go? From e8, there's a pawn on d6, so maybe not there. c7, maybe something like that. But I think knight h5 is much more natural. Knight h5 is played. Okay, the opponent plays a4. a4 is very not logical, so let's think about this. a4 is a move you kind of play out of panic if you think the opponent's attack is going to rage on and trying to prevent it early. Like, so, there is some ideas in the dragon to play a4, but I don't think here it's as good. Because your king is likely to go on the queen side. If you play a4, now I always have the option of taking that, or I always have the option of pushing the pawn in with b5. Okay. So here I will, okay, we take b takes a4. And here I will take stock of the position. So there's been 11 moves from each side. So 1/3 of the game done. And we will take stock of this position. So pause the video, name every piece where every single piece is, and then unpause the video. For all of you that are doing this, pretty elite stuff, I have to say, because I don't think many people would make it past like 3 moves of the first game, if I'm being honest. Not 3 moves, maybe 7 moves of the first game. So if you're up to this and you're still kicking, well done. Okay, pause the video now. Enough. Okay, I won't say that. Okay, so now it's time for me to take stock of the position as well. Black army. As black, we haven't castled yet, so our rook is still on a8. Our king is still on e8. I guess we'll start with the pawns first. Pawn h7, pawn g6, pawn f7, pawn e7, pawn d6, yep, pawn d6. Our pawn on c file is gone because, of course, we took on d4 at the start of the game, and we have our pawns on a6 and a4. So the b files and c files are open for our pieces. Now, as for the pieces, we have a bishop on g7, a knight on knight on h5. Don't get ahead of yourself. Knight on h5. Knight on d7. A bishop still on c8. A queen still on d8. And a rook still on d8. Now, white pieces. White still has not castled. Now, as for the pawn structure, white's pawn still, okay. I don't believe the h pawn has moved. So h2, g5, because the pawn has been pushed to g5, f3, f3, e4, The d pawn has gone, we have taken it, and we've done well by taking it. c2, b2, and that's it, because we've just taken the pawn on a4. As for their pieces, their king is still on e1, their rook is on a1, knight on c3, knight on d4, so knight on c3, d4, bishop on e3, bishop still on f1, queen on d2, yeah, I think that's it. I think I said everything. If I was missing the rooks in the corner, the rooks are still in the corner. So rook on h1 and rook on a1. Yeah, that's the army. So I think I've taken stock of the position quite well. And I think black is doing fine here. Because now the C and B files are open. Now it's going to be hard for white to castle at all in this game. So let's see what happens. The opponent plays the move rook takes a4. Okay, now they're definitely not going to castle on the queen side. Rook takes a4 makes some sense. I use some in quotations. I mean, now there's a weakness. Guess we have a weakness on a2. Not a2, a7. We have a weakness, oh no, a6, sorry, a6. But that's not really exploitable at the moment. It's got two attackers, the rook on a4, the bishop on e3. But we also, no, the bishop on e3 doesn't attack the pawn. What am I on about? Bishop e3 attacks a7, yeah. Attacks a7, and I know this because e3 is a dark square, and pawn on a6 is a light square, so it's not the same. It's not really exploitable, and I think the opening of the B and C files is more advantageous for black. So let's see what happens next. Let's see what's gonna happen next. We play bishop to b7. Okay, bishop to b7 makes a lot of sense. Developing the last piece into the game. Now, pause the video, ask yourself what the bishop on e7 looks at, and tell me all the pieces on the diagonal the bishop on b7 looks at. So name every single piece that it would x-ray. Okay, so it's hitting the rook, its own rook on a8. The c6 square is a blank square. So there's nothing on c6. Is there anything on d5? So I want you to answer that. So if you said there's nothing on d5, that's good. So there's a pawn on e4. There's a pawn on, damn, I'm tired. There's a pawn on f3. There is nothing on g2. And there's a rook on a1. So you can get the picture of the entire board when doing something like this. Oh, the board is, I can see the board. I can see a drawing. Okay. Bishop b7 is played. Now the opponent goes knight to b3. So they've had enough with their knight on d4. They've moved it to b3. And the knight on b3, it's attacking a pawn. It's attacking the pawn on... Oh, sorry, it's not attacking the pawn, but it is controlling the a5 square. So a key idea in these Sicilian positions for white is to control the square on a5. Typically, there becomes a weakness where there's a square they can occupy on a5, and essentially it plays against that bad bishop. The bishop we have on b7 is not a great piece. It stares at the pawns, and if you put a knight on a5 and you get a knight on a5, you can attack that bishop. The bishop doesn't have a good square. It's going to have to move back to c8. The only way you can really counter that is playing something like rook b8, bishop a8. Or you can find a home for the bishop, I guess, c8, d7 or something. But yeah, it's a typical idea. This knight b3, knight a5. So we castle. And the opponent plays knight a5, as suspected. Did my detective work, figured it out. And we did castle, which makes sense, because there's not really an attack now, because we have the pawns on g5, the knight on h5. You can't really break that construction at the moment. Knight a5. Now we play queen c7. Queen c7. Okay. Question for you. I want you to tell me all the same way we did last time, all the pieces the queen on c7 attacks, and it x-rays as well. So every single x-ray vision the queen has, and tell me what piece is on that square. This is a very good exercise to really understand if you see the board entirely. Good exercise for me as well. So let's see. So c6 is still a blank square. c5, blank square, I believe. Yes. c4, blank square. c3, there's a knight. c2, there's a pawn. c1 is blank. Now, I know c7 is a dark square, so okay, b6 is also blank, and a5 is a pawn, which is, it's a pawn. I don't know what else I can say. b7 is a bishop, and a7 is blank. Now also, if we see on the other side, we have d7, which there's a knight on d7, there's a pawn on e7, there's a pawn on f7, there's a bishop on g7, and there's a pawn on h7. Now looking at the diagonal through the pawn, so d6, there's a pawn. d6, what is there? And then the e5. e5 looks pretty blank to me. Yes. f4 is also blank. g3 is also blank. And h2 is also... Ooh. Yeah, no. f4, g3. Yeah, g3 is blank, but h2 there's a pawn. So I have to be a bit attentive. Okay, that's good. Everything else is safe. We've castled, knight on f6, bishop on g7, bishop still on b7, rook on a8, knight on a5. The opponents, they still have their knight on that knight moved to b3. Yeah, they still have the knight on c3, knight on a5, bishop on e3, bishop on c1, pawns, h2, g5, h2, g5, f3, e4, c2, b2, a2. King still on e1, rook on a4. Oh, that rook can get under attack. So I want you to tell me all the pieces that are defending that rook on a4. So well done if you said the knight on c3. That's also the only piece I see that's defending that rook. It's on a pretty precarious square. And I don't know the definition of precarious, but it sounds cool. So I'm going to say the word anyway. Okay, next move is a5, c7. Okay, they play the move knight takes b7. They have eliminated the bishop. Now, I don't know if that was the best idea. That bishop was not harming anyone at all. And now you've kind of given up a pretty good piece on a5 for that bishop that was not very good at all. And now black is just left with powerhouses. It's got an insane bishop on g7, a good queen on b7, a rook that's coming to c8 or b8. I don't like that move at all. We'll check it later, but I don't like that move on first glance. But I'm sure the player had a reason for it. Knight takes b7, queen takes b7, and they play the move knight d5. Knight d5 is a logical move in this structure where you have pawns e4, f3, and you put the knight on e5. Here... Oh. What I'm wondering is, okay, you played knight e5. Now, if we take stock of the position, if you need to pause the video, but I can see bishop on g7, knight on f6, we've castled, so rook on a8, queen on b7. There's a rook on a4, the knight is gone from a5, the bishop's still on e3, the bishop is on c1, pawns h2, g5. Yeah, I don't understand this, because if I was the player, I'm thinking, why can't we trade this? I guess queen takes, right? No. I see. Yeah. So knight d5, if knight takes d5, queen takes d5. We can't take on b7 because they take on a8. Is that what's happening? But can't I trade the queens and then take on b7? I mean b2. I keep saying b7. I meant b2. Sorry if you got confused there. Can I trade the queens and so why can't I play knight takes? Knight takes d5. Queen takes d5. Queen takes d5. Pawn takes or rook takes. And take the pawn on b2 with the bishop. Because from what I see, they have a bishop on e3, a bishop on c1, rook on a4. There's nothing to... They have not castled. They have not castled, right? Yep, no castling. So why can't I do that? Why can't I take on d5, take on d5, and then take on b7? I'm a bit confused. I'm a bit perplexed. Aha, that's why. I know. I'm not sure. The pawn... Aha, okay. This is something I failed to see, actually. That pawn on a6 is being attacked by the bishop on f1 and the rook on a4. So that pawn is being attacked. Let me quickly activate my hotkey and start looking at the board a bit clearer. Okay, hotkey activated. I see a nice blue board with white design. Okay, yeah. The bishop on f1 and the rook on a4 is attacking that pawn on a6. So if we trade all the pieces and take on b7, they take anyway our pawn. Ooh, but maybe there we have... Oh, no. Oh. Rook a4. I was thinking we had bishop c6 check. Or bishop c3 check, but we don't have bishop c3 check. Because it doesn't attack much. Oh, we do have the check, but... It just doesn't do much. Okay, let's see what happens in the game. Knight b3. Castle knight a5, queen c7, knight b7. Queen c... Oh, we couldn't even see what happens in the game. Let's see. Knight d5. Queen takes b2. Okay, they play queen takes b2 straight away. Something I was considering and calculating. So, yeah, not too bad. And the opponent plays knight takes e7 check. Okay, this is something I didn't see straight away. Now I kind of see it. Knight takes e7. That e7 pawn was undefended. But we take on b2. So this is getting a bit complex. So I would take stock of the position right now. Actually, after king h8, because king h8 is forced. So, yeah, after king h8, take stock of the position. Okay, black pieces. And if this is tiring, it is. If you think it's tiring for me and I'm doing it, I guess I am tired though. But anyone could be tired. Okay, who cares? h7, g6, f7. Those are the pawns. Now the pawn on e7 is gone. d6 is still there. I believe a4. No, a4 is gone. And just a6. So we just have a6. So we just have 5 pawns. Very interesting. And we have a rook on a8 still. Knight on d7, knight on f6, bishop on g7, and a castled king. Okay, that's a pretty standard position. I'm not too fussed about it. Now the opponent has a knight on e7 in our territory. They have a king on e8, and their pawn structure is... Okay, they've lost their b and a pawn. They have a pawn on c2. They've lost their d pawn. They have a pawn on e4, f3, g5, h2. They have a rook on h1, a queen on d2, bishop on e3, bishop on f1, a knight on e7, which I've already mentioned. I believe that is all. And a rook on a4 if I didn't already say that. And let's ask ourselves some questions about the position to really understand it. What are all the squares their opponent's queen can move to? So from what I can see, that queen, it's on d2. It can't go to e3, the bishop is there. It can go to d2. It can go to c2. Oh, I'm saying the wrong... I'm losing my mind. I'm saying the wrong coordinate because I'm looking from the opposite perspective, which I don't normally do. The queen can... The queen is on... The queen is on d2. It can go to e2. It can go to f2. It can go to g2. Can't go to h2, there's a pawn there. Now, whoever said chess burns a lot of calories, I think was right, because I'm sweating right now. Sweating. Okay, now, as for on the opposite diagonal, so let's take a look at the diagonals. As for c2, it can't go because there's a pawn there. d1 is available. d3 is also... d3... Yeah, I don't see why d3 is not available. It's open square. d4, although, is also available. Now d5 is also available now because the knight has moved. So now we're getting a full vision of the board. Now as for c3 is available, b4 is available, a5 is... a5 should be available, yeah. Because the knight took, yeah. d2, c3, b4, a5, yeah. Yes, sir, okay. So now we have a better grasp of the position. And the queen is also staring down the d6 pawn. That is something that's very important. The d6 pawn is being hit by the queen. Now, is there any defense on this d6 pawn? So I want you to pause the video and try and answer that. Now, I would believe there is not. So I don't think there's anything defending d6. Now let's see what happens in the game. This is a bit tiring. Queen takes b2, knight takes e7, king h8, rook b4 is played. Okay. So the opponent plays rook b4 now. And rook b4. b4 is a square that is defended by the... Yeah, b4 is defended by the queen. And it also attacks our queen. So where can we move our queen now? That it's safe. Now c3, not a safe square. Doesn't look like a safe square to me. d4. I mean, the only safe square really is... I mean, we can give a check. We can give a check. They could maybe block it. How can they block the check? They have a bishop on e3. Can they block? Okay, let's see. So we play queen a1 check, and they play king f2, so they couldn't really block the check. If they could, there's queen d1. Yeah, queen d1 was possible. I think that's about it. But king f2, I don't really like, because now that bishop is pretty locked in. You're going to have to put the bishop on g2, and on g2 it stares at the pawn on f3. And we still have a knight on h5. And on f2, I'm wondering, yeah. Yeah, it's okay. It's not a terrible score. King f2, rook a to e8. So the rook on the a file goes to e8. So we have a few more moves, and I think we're how long into this? 1 hour and 7 minutes, and my hair is a bit dodgy. All right, let's speed through this. So this one we won't get to fully. You know what? We'll complete this game tomorrow. So I don't want to overstress us. We'll complete this game tomorrow and do another one. And yeah, we'll look at where this position led us, just so we see what has happened so far. a6. So this is kind of a... a6 is not the main move, but it's a move. It's like the dragon dwarf. Queen d2, knight d7. So far so good. Knight h5, take, rook a4. I think here it started getting a bit complicated. Knight a5, queen c7, take, take, knight d5. So here knight c5 was a move. They took on e7. This d6 pawn, which I said undefended, was undefended. This pawn is also undefended. Something you see after you go through this. But they play the move rook b4, which is a bit of a strange choice. And they could have blocked with the queen on either square, but they choose not to. Yeah. I guess if you block with the queen, what's the issue? Just curious. Bishop c3. Ah, yeah, of course. There, bishop c3, and here, bishop c3. Ah, yeah, of course. You can't block with the queen because of bishop c3. Yeah, this is pretty obvious, actually. King f2, f6. So yeah, okay. This is where we stop. So we will continue on the game from here next time. We'll actually start from this position and try and visualize all the way till the end. This one was a hard game. Actually, surprisingly hard. So we'll definitely go through it tomorrow. Try and finish it off, and we'll go through a couple more.